What would you do if you had a physical or mental disability and you're being abused? You have no resources or support. You're dependent on people to help you. And instead, they take advantage of you and abuse you. Domestic violence and abuse are horrible even when you don't have any kind of disability. Just imagine being in a wheelchair or not being able to feed yourself, bathe yourself, something as simple as being able to verbally express what your needs are, or you're visually or hearing impaired. It can be even a darker place for someone who's experiencing sexual, emotional, financial abuse. I have Wynne Charles on the show today who is going to share her story of having cerebral palsy and being abused by a woman and her advocacy work for the disability community. That is next on the Wounds of the Faithful podcast.
Welcome to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast, brought to you by DSW Ministries. Your host is singer, songwriter, speaker, and domestic violence advocate Diana Winkler. She is passionate about helping survivors in the church heal from domestic violence and abuse and trauma. This podcast is not a substitute for professional counseling or qualified medical help. Now, here is Diana.
Welcome, everyone. Just a small announcement today. I have been a bit overwhelmed with keeping up with everything in my life. I'm trying to do the time management thing as best that I can, but I have a lot on my plate. I did reduce the episodes to around 30 minutes, thinking that would be easier. I am considering now posting every other week instead of weekly to see if that helps me. So I'm not going anywhere. I still want to do the podcast. I just need a little more breathing room. This past week, my editing software for the podcast wasn't working, so I didn't even get to post an episode. That's just the reality of it, folks. Not the end of the world, but it is really frustrating to me when the technology doesn't work. So starting this week, I'm going to try posting every other week. Now, you can binge previous episodes that you might have missed. They are all on my website, dswministries.org/blog. Or I think that Spotify shows all of my episodes from the last 3 years. I think Apple Podcasts only shows the last 10 or 20. Don't quote me on that. But as I said in the intro, we have a wonderful guest today. I've been wanting to have differing viewpoints and experiences on the podcast from those who have suffered abuse and domestic violence. I've been wanting to have someone on the show who is disabled to tell their story because I know for a fact that this is a vulnerable population. Vulnerable people get taken advantage of and abused. So when Charles is on the show, she reached out to me to be on the show. Let me read a little bit about her. She's a podcaster herself and has a podcast called CEO of a Disability podcast. CEO of a Disability welcomes you to give you hope to differently shaped community defined as the disabled in the dictionary. And also, but most importantly, giving hope to their caregivers and those that love them with teaching them how to start their own business or not giving up on their disability. About the host, Wynne Charles. She has cerebral palsy, and her mission is to help others with physical and mental disabilities to find their voices through written or spoken word using today's assistive technologies as needed. So I have a written transcript on my website for every episode when you need it. On YouTube, I have captions for each video if you need that for better understanding. And be sure to share this episode with somebody that really needs it. If you yourself are not disabled, I'm sure you know somebody that is that could benefit from the content that Wynne is going to share with us today. So I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Wynne Charles. All right, please welcome to the podcast, Wynne Charles, right here in
Thank you,
Phoenix.
Diane, for having me on. For those of you that don't know what cerebral palsy is, let's cut right to the chase here.
All right.
Cerebral palsy is a lack of oxygen injury at birth. I was born with cerebral palsy in 1987, 1 pound, 13 ounces, 27 weeks. Thank you very much. So you figure that one out. I was supposed to be born in September, ended up being born in June. So that's the short version of cerebral palsy.
Mm. So what would you like people to know about Wynne right out of the gate here about you?
Give me a challenge and I don't say no.
I love it.
I take challenges heads on.
You
Head
do.
on. So, yeah.
And we were talking about how everybody thinks Phoenix is bright and sunny and hot all the time. Today it's raining.
Nope.
It's raining
Today
buckets
it's
today.
rainy, it's rainy, it's cold, it's miserable. So, well, I wouldn't say it's miserable. I would take this cold over Aspen cold
Oh yeah.
any day.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Aspen, Colorado. Why don't you tell us about your childhood? You already told us about when you were born and such. Tell us what your childhood was like.
My childhood, I had the best childhood I could imagine up until I was 23, and we can get into why. But I was thankfully mainstreamed in a private school and also in public schools and in college too. I have a college degree in education, and I'm working on my journalism degree. That life got in the way, and so I had to quit that, take a break, and then life got in the way of that. But I hope one of these days I can go back and pursue my journalism degree. But I had, because I was mainstreamed, I had the best childhood imaginable, and unfortunately, because of best childhood imaginable, my mom didn't tell me that I had CP until I was in 7th grade. So then she decided to take me to school one day and stop at the end of a driveway and look at me straight in the face and said, "When you have CP, it's a condition that will affect your life for the rest of your life. Now go have a great day, and I'll see you later." And I'm like, okay, you just gave me words that would change my life. Fast forward, I get to high school. I am doing research on cerebral palsy. I type in what is CP because at the time I didn't even know what CP was. And I'm like, what? And these words pop up on my screen, and they're cerebral palsy. I'm like, oh boy, that's CP. And then life goes on, and then this is a tricky part. I graduated high school. My life is sailing along up until 2010. The demeanor of my mom changes, and I unfortunately lost her when I was 23 years old. 2 brain aneurysms, one of which they caught, and she was becoming in a hospital. 2 of which they didn't catch, and she ended up having migraine seizures and dying of brain aneurysms, which is quite common if they don't catch brain aneurysms, because brain aneurysm burst. It's a pocket of blood on your brain, and you have to be careful they don't burst. So, of course, my mom died of brain aneurysm. They call, my family was there. they call a chaplain in to do the last rites. Of course, now I have spoken to chaplains about this. And the chaplains that I have spoken to couldn't believe it that I got kicked out of the room her next of kin as in doing the final rites on my mom. So I'm like, okay, you get kicked out of the room. And then the day she died, we came from a church in Denver, Colorado. My dad was an atheist. He would barely step foot inside the church. My mom's family was Catholic and is Catholic. And so they wanted to go to church. The day she died, we were coming from church to the hospital. And that was the most somber color ride because I knew something was up. And I'm like, I went home thinking that she was going to be fine. She was going to be recovered. Family came up to get me and said, Mom is really sick. We need to go back down. And I was like, okay, here we go. And then I remember going to say my final goodbyes because by that time I knew that she was in a mentally induced coma. I get greeted at the door by family members who happen to be physicians. One was a nurse, and the other one was a family doctor. And they said, your mother's in a mentally induced coma. It wasn't, hello, how are you? Why are we here? And I'm like, great, just got here with my dad, and then my dad tried to hide the cell phone message that the doctor left him about his coma. Yeah, that when I figured that one out because I heard I get kicked out of the room when the chaplain comes in to do the final rites, and that was the first blow. The second blow, fast forward, was my dad and I are struggling after the loss of my mom. My dad doesn't even know how to help me, let alone take care of the house, let alone take care of me, let alone pay the bills. And so that was the first blow. And then the second blow was 9 years later in 2019. He drives himself to the emergency room after telling the doctor that he can't breathe. And so he gets diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and dies 6 days after diagnosis. And that was the second blow of my life. And I'm like, okay, now what? And so the day he got diagnosed with cancer, I stayed behind at the hotel and I made the decisions. One of them was to sell my house. Well, I told people I was ready to sell my house, and I told people that. And at the time, I was going through a legal case too. We all had to pick up the pieces, and that's why I say to people, get your paperwork together while your loved ones alive, especially if you have a disabled child that you're dealing with. So anyway, the legal case just now finally got resolved. Since I moved down here, this legal case kept going on and on and on and on, and more people kept getting involved with my legal case. But in the meantime, while this legal case was going on, and all this chaos after my dad died. So after this legal case, believe it or not, my family comes out, and then I got abused by my family. And believe it or not, that was my abuser's sister calling me. I still have contact with, and I find it ironic as I'm telling this story that she called me. So she abused me. My godmother abused me. And for those of you that follow the Catholic faith, know in Catholicism that they say the godparents must help the kids. Isn't it true that they say that? And aren't the godparents supposed to have that covenant to help the kids, not abuse the kids? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And so she put me in the shower against my will, number one, and then did a number on me. And I won't say what she did because it's too graphic for this podcast, but long story short, because of the graphic nature of what she did, and the dum didn't realize that she was abusing what they call a mandatory reporter. And what a mandatory reporter is a person, if they see something strange, particularly with kids. Me having education degree, I got that mandatory reporter training. Basically, what that is in a nutshell is if the kid comes in with bruises all over his body and you hear them falling on the playground and he says, "Mommy hit me," you're supposed to call as a responsible adult protective services.
Right.
So after this, all abuse towards me happened, and of course, my aide, my stepsister at the time, my mom, my stepmom at the time watched all this happen. My stepmom and my dad weren't married by any means because my dad wanted me to be financially stable, before he got my stepmom involved. But she kept calling herself my stepmom, don't know why. But anyway, she witnessed it, my aide witnessed it, my stepsister witnessed it enough, and my abuser almost broke my stepsister's arm by dragging her down the stairs with a shaver to shave me. People have got to remember that my aide had massively changed her position from housekeeper to now personal assistant to now cook to now, and we're all trying to do the best we can. They leave it to the people around the next kin, or they leave it to the next kin when a person dies. So my family comes in and abuses me. So I'm like, okay, now what? They abuse first a mandatory reporter, and so what does that mandatory reporter supposed to do? Am I supposed to call adult protective services and say I was abused, or am I supposed to take it one step further? Well, I took it one step further. I had a counselor at that time ask me, "Do you feel safe at home?" She knew I was disabled, and I said yes, but this is what happened. And so this is what happened, and me tipping her, the counselor. And the counselor, by the way, counselors are mandatory reporters, if you haven't figured that one out. Any counselor you go to, if an adult says a person is molesting me, a person is raping me, I'm in trouble, the counselors are trained. And so my counselor at the time reported it without my knowledge to adult protective services. So I walk in to counseling that next week, and I was like, okay, we finished the counseling session. I go out to the lobby to go look for my aide. I thought she was downstairs on a phone, reading a book, or because she could do whatever she wanted during my appointment. I didn't require her to be at counseling, even though my stepmom wanted it to be. I don't know. My stepmom was a little too nosy, thank you very much, and wanted control freak. And she wanted to know what everything that was going on counseling. I put the kibosh on it, and I said, no way. I said to my aide, no way. I said, you stay out of my counseling sessions. Thank you very much. And then I walk out of my counseling sessions, and then she's nowhere to be found. And I go, okay, she must be in a car on the phone. She must be in the bathroom. I will start walking out. A stranger to me says, are you looking for your aid? Because he knows I'm on a walker. I mean, he can steer. He knows I'm disabled. And he goes, your aid is an adult protective services. He didn't say giving a witness statement. Well, in my brain, it clicked that she was giving a witness statement. And then it clicked who reported the whole abuse to adult protective services because she did her job outside of counseling. She did her job. So I'm like, oh, great. Here we go. So then I walk over to adult protective services. Now, this counseling office and adult protective services were 2 feet away from each other next door. And so by the time I get pulled into adult protective services, they sit me down. They said, well, Wynne, we know about your case. And I said, okay, that's fine. We want to schedule a professional interview with you. I said, well, that's fine. I'm my own guardian. I was always my own guardian. So even though I lived with my stepmom, she wanted to take custody of me. That was another fun custody battle, but that resolved in her not taking custody of me nor my family. And so I'm my own guardian at this point. The adult protective services said, we need you to go, and my aide listened to this whole thing. We need you as the main abusee to go down to Glenwood, which was 30 miles away from my house at that time, and give a professional interview. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but does my stepmom know about this? And they go, oh, yes, she does. We called her at work. And I'm like, okay, you called her at work, you got a cell phone number. And I'm like, okay, this is good. And then adult protective services, my aide, myself, walk out. And I remember adult protective services saying, do not tell Mallory Pisano, who was my stepmom, what had just happened, because we need a witness statement from her, and we don't want to screw up anyone's witness statements. They go succinctly. For those of you who have ever witnessed emotional abuse or physical abuse or anything else, they end up going succinctly because they don't want to cross-contaminate what people are saying. Mm-hmm. So my aide says, okay, I won't tell Mallory. And Mallory goes, well, to my aide, what happened at Adult Protective Services? And my aide goes, I'm not allowed to tell you. And so I go down to the professional interviewer's office. The DA and the cops were sitting behind a wall, and it's all the same in all 50 states. And when you get professionally interviewed, they make you tell the story again, which the first time I did it was a little traumatic. And my aide goes, do you want me to be there with you, or do you want me to stay with you? And I said no, for the exact same reason that Adult Protective Services told my aide, don't tell Mallory what went on, because you already gave your witness statement, and I didn't want Mallory to find out even more. And so they actually called my stepsister by phone. She gave her witness statement. And then Valerie gave her witness statement at my house. We all got shooing out of the room when Mallory gave her witness statement. Before the cops showed up at my house, Mallory goes, "Why do I have to do this? I don't want to do this." And I'm like, okay, you just witnessed emotional and physical abuse by my mom's family, and you don't want to do this? Well, yeah. So she did, but it was, but I was like, okay. Most people in their right mind would say, yes, I want to help a person out there, but no, that was my stepmom for you. And then we'll get to the end of it, and Adult Protective Services calls my abuser and her stepsister and her sister. And my abuser thinks that she did nothing wrong, still to this day, thinks that she did nothing wrong towards me. And then Adult Protective Services in Colorado said, "Don't you dare have any communications with her." And I said, I would not, ever. And so she now, my abuser, has a record against her. I just told the reporter I wanted to do this. Anyway, she now has a record against her because of what she did to me. And so my main point of that whole story is always, always, always trust your gut, and it could happen to anyone. It could happen disabled or not. It could happen to anyone.
Well, this is a great place to stop my conversation with Wynne. I know that you'll want to hear the rest of her story and what is she doing today. And I know that she is doing great things to help the disability community. So we will see you next time on the Wounds of the Faithful podcast. So God bless you and bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast. If this episode has been helpful to you, please hit the subscribe button and tell a friend. You can connect with us at dswministries.org, where you'll find our blog along with our Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel links. Hope to see you next week.